Hi everyone, my name is Margaret, and in this video I'm going to show you how to crochet the double crochet stitch, as well as go over different variations on how you might see the very first double crochet stitch worked when you're starting a new row or a new round. For today's demo, I'm again using my 4.5mm crochet hook, also called a size 7 hook. And I'm going to be using this worsted weight or weight number 4 plied 100% cotton yarn. For today's demo, I'm going to do the same thing as the half double crochet and single crochet stitch demos, where I will make a swatch that is 10 stitches wide. I've gone ahead and crocheted 10 chain stitches for my foundation chain. And now I'm going to start working my double crochet stitches. And as usual, I'm going to attach mine to the back loops only of that foundation chain. For the first method I'm going to show, it's going to be very similar to how I've started new rows of stitches in the previous videos, where we're going to make a turning chain and then we're going to just skip over it and ignore it when we are going back to count our finished stitches. So personally, I like to do, if I'm doing this method, 2 chain stitches to start the row. Some people might do 3. Occasionally you might see people doing 1 and they'll just pull that up really tall. Again, do what you think suits your project and stick to that for the project. So now I've done 2 extra chain stitches and I'm going to skip over those. So my first double crochet stitch will be placed in the 3rd chain from the hook. And double crochet stitch starts out the same way as half double crochet stitch, where you'll yarn over and then insert the hook where you want to attach it, and then yarn over again and pull up a new loop through that stitch in the previous row. So you'll end up with 3 loops on your hook like this. So now we're going to do something new. Instead of doing a yarn over to pull up a new loop through all 3, we're going to do that yarn over and pull through just the first 2 loops like that. So now you have 2 loops on your hook again. And to finish the double crochet stitch, you're going to yarn over and then pull that through both loops. So here, for the very start, I've got my 2 chain stitches. So right here on the edge, that's my turning chain, these 2 right here. And then this little post or column, that's my first completed single crochet stitch. So I'm going to go ahead and place a stitch marker into the top of the completed stitch like that, so it'll be easier to find it later. And I'll go ahead and do a few more. So I'll make sure my working yarn is in front of the hook when I put it back in. And our next double crochet stitch, we're not going to skip anymore, so I'm going to place it right here. So the steps again are yarn over, insert the hook into where you want to attach it, yarn over, pull back through that stitch or whatever your attachment point was, so you have 3 loops on the hook, yarn over, pull through the first 2 stitches, so you end up with 2 loops, yarn over one more time and pull through 2 so that you end with 1 working loop on your hook like that. So here I've got 2 completed double crochet stitches. Let's do one more. So we'll yarn over, insert the hook, yarn over, pull through that stitch, yarn over, pull through 2 loops, yarn over, pull through 2 loops. We're going to find the next chain where we're going to attach it, yarn over, insert the hook into there, yarn over, pull up a loop back through the chain. So we have 3 loops, yarn over, pull through 2 loops, yarn over, pull through 2 loops. Find the next chain, yarn over, insert into that chain stitch, yarn over, pull back through that chain stitch to get 3 loops, yarn over, pull through the 2 loops. Don't forget yarn over one more time to go through those last 2. So at this point, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 completed double crochet stitches. So I'll go ahead and finish up the rest of this row, and we can take a second to look at the structure of our double crochets. So here is my completed row. I've got 10 stitches of double crochet, so same as with all the other stitches. If you look at the very top edge, you should see that row of V's, and each of these V's corresponds to one completed stitch. And if you've got trouble telling where the first one starts, just put a stitch marker in as soon as you finished it, so that way you can be extra sure. So for each of our individual stitches, let's see if we can focus there. So it'll look like there's almost a half double crochet at the bottom. So you have your V that's kind of grabbing onto the row below with a little diagonal loop on top of it. And then sitting right on top of that, it almost looks like a single crochet stitch. So you have a V that's kind of adding the vertical height, and then that loop on the top. So since the double crochet stitches are taller, and for the standard version, they are not linked horizontally other than at the very top and the very bottom, it is normal to have some kind of spaces between them like this. So those are the spaces that are between the posts or the columns that make up your finished stitch. And if we turn the row over to look at the back side of the row, it looks like this. So a little bit of a different structure with more of the loops kind of sitting vertically, but you can still see a lot easier, I think, than in half double or single crochet stitches, all the individual stitches from the side, not just from the top. So I'm going to do one more row of double crochet stitches using this method. So I'm going to put my hook back in here. And so new row, I'm going to start with a turning chain, and to match my previous row, I'm going to do 2 chain stitches for that turning chain like that. So that means when I skip those 2, my first stitch in the row is going to be attached here to that 3rd stitch from the hook. And for this row, I'm going to go ahead and work through both loops of each stitch in the row below. So to review, we're going to yarn over, so down in front, up behind. We're going to insert the hook into the stitch that we want to attach it to. We'll yarn over, pull up a loop back through that stitch. So you've got 3 loops, yarn over, pull through 2 loops, yarn over, pull through 2 loops like that. So again, for your first one, it's going to look a little bit bulky because you've got that extra yarn from the turning chains on the side. But going forward, you will just put your new stitch into the next available spot in the row below. So that's where I'll go next. So yarn over, insert the hook, yarn over, pull up a loop through that stitch, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. Find the next spot, yarn over, insert the hook, yarn over, pull up a loop just through that stitch, yarn over, pull through 2 loops, yarn over, pull through 2 loops. So as I work down the row, I am careful when I'm going into just the top 2 loops to work. So I'm actually picking up just that V at the top like this. I'm not going into the space between the posts like that. So if maybe one of your first experiences with crocheting was making granny squares, it might feel more familiar to stick your hook in the gaps kind of between those posts. But for a standard double crochet stitch that's worked through both loops, again, just make sure you're actually sticking the hook through those 2 at the very top like that, and that you are not accidentally going between the posts and then pulling the yarn all the way up through there. So that is a totally valid way to make a double crochet stitch, but it will make your finished fabric look different. So if you're, say, following a written pattern that just says, do 30 double crochet stitches and there's no extra instructions about specifically attaching them between the posts, if you do that, work between the posts, your finished object is not going to look quite the same. So it's just good to be aware that that is a difference. So when we finish off this row, the new row is only attached to the very tops of the stitches that we worked previously. So here I'm getting to the end, and I'll go ahead and take that stitch marker out and then make my last stitch into both loops right here. So that was a second row of double crochet stitches, and for this row I worked into both loops of the stitches in the row below. So that's the front side of the most recent row, and if we flip it over we can see there is the back side, and again you can see the little posts for the individual double crochets, and the top will have that familiar sort of braid. For our next row of double crochet stitches, I'm going to show you an alternate way that you might see to make the very first double crochet stitch in the row. So the first method I showed, you make your chain stitches for your turning chain, and then you do not consider the turning chain as a double crochet stitch. It's not really part of the row, so to say. For this other method, which you'll see also fairly commonly in like instruction books, especially some older patterns, it'll tell you to start your new row with a turning chain. And for this method, it's pretty much always with 3 chain stitches, but the difference is we're going to count our turning chain as our first stitch. So basically we've done our chain 3 and we're going to use our imagination and pretend that this was a regular double crochet stitch and that its placement was right here, because again this was the actual start of my row of 10 stitches and I added those extra 3 chains. So we're pretending that this is one stitch, one double crochet stitch that lives here. So for our second stitch in the row, we're not going to place it in the 4th stitch from the hook. We're going to place it in the 5th stitch from the hook right here. So for that second stitch, we go back to making it normally, so that yarn over, insert the hook, yarn over to pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2 loops, yarn over, pull through 2 loops. So at this point, With this method, where the turning chain is a stitch, we would count this as 1, 2 completed double crochet stitches. So I know that doesn't look like a completed stitch, but that's just how this method goes. So for the rest of the row, it will be completely the same as how I've previously worked it. Same steps all the way to the end of the row. So let me finish this up and I'll show you that one more time. And then we'll look at some swatches to compare what sort of larger areas of each of those different methods look like. So here I've completed my 10 double crochet stitches in this row. Again, for this one, this right here is what I would count as the top of the first stitch in the row. So this would be 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. So if I was going to start another row this way, I will turn my work. So right now this is where the first stitch in this new one will live. I'm going to make 3 chains. So 1, 2, 3, and we're going to pretend, or we're just going to count this chain 3 as 1 double crochet stitch. So our second double crochet stitch in the row, we're going to go skip those 3. We're going to skip the 4th one because that's the base where we're considering these to be like attached. So our second stitch in the row with this method is going to go into the 5th chain, or the 5th stitch from the hook. And starting with that second stitch, you can work it regularly. So yarn over, insert the hook, pull up a loop, and then pull through 2 loops, pull through 2 loops. So at this point, it'll look like that. And this is considered as 1, 2 completed stitches. So let's take a look at some swatches of that. So it does create quite a different look. So here on this side, I have the first method. So that was where you chain 2 and the turning chain is not considered a stitch. This one right here is the second method where we do 3 chain stitches and then we do consider that a stitch. So you can see neither of these have super straight edges for the first method with the turning chain not counted. It's more solid, but it's a little bit more scalloped there on the side. Again, once you've got several rows going, it should look at least like even in the sense that, like, you know, they're all the same size, but there is going to be a little bit of scalloping, and that is expected. For this one, the edges, especially if once you've, you know, straightened it out a little bit, tend to have a slightly more shallow scalloping. It's closer to being straight. However, because as much as we are pretending, the chain 3 is not literally the same thing, or it's not the same structure as a double crochet stitch, you do end up with gaps there on the sides. So I would say for the majority of like pattern books and instructions I've seen, like at least the ones aimed at beginners, you're gonna see one of these 2 methods. So the one where the turning chain is not counted as a stitch, and the one where it is counted as a stitch. Oh, and one more thing. So on that note, when you're doing the method where the turning chain is counted as a stitch, when you're working the final stitch in your row, that's going to end up attached to the very top of that chain 3 in the row below. So that can be a little bit fiddly, but here, once you get to the end, like this. So here I've got one more stitch left. So this was that chain 3. And because we are counting it as a stitch, we're going to work into the top of it. So I usually try to get into both loops of that chain if I am working through both loops of all the other stitches. If you're working for just the back loops or just the front loops, again, you would pick up the same one on this last one, but if you need to use your fingernails to get it on there, do what you need to do. And otherwise, same thing. So yarn over, pull back through the top of that stitch, and then pull through 2, pull through 2. So your finished row looks like that with the final double crochet stitch attached to the top of that chain 3. So like that, and that's how you would end up with this sort of a fabric. And again, let's compare it to that more solid one here. So at this point, you may be thinking to yourself, wow, for the double crochet stitches, the edges don't look nearly as neat as using that same method, at least for this one, with the single crochet stitch or the half double crochet stitch. This particular swatch has 2 chain stitches for the turning chain. And you know what? You're right. It is a little bit bumpier, and plenty of other people have thought that as well. So now I'm going to introduce a third method for how to start your double crochet stitch rows. And this one is called the standing stitch method. And there are actually a bunch of different ways to do the standing stitch. I'll show you 2 of them. So one of them looks, I would say, the most like a regular double crochet stitch. So that's this one right here. So you can see our very first stitch in the row looks way more similar to our like true double crochet stitches versus say that chain 3 where the 3 chains are pretending to be that first stitch. I find this quite fiddly, so if you want to have a slightly neater option that is a little bit easier to like tension, I also like this method here. So yeah, let's get into that. So here we are again at our 10 stitch wide swatch, and let's learn how to do the first of the 2 standing stitch options. So you can make a whole bunch of different types of stitch with that like standing stitch method. Typically it's used for taller stitches, so double crochet, treble crochet, double treble, and so on. But for that, there is no turning chain at all. Our first double crochet stitch, we're going to just work it immediately right into here. So to start this method, and again, this is the one that I think looks most like a true double crochet stitch, you're going to pull up your working loop so it's maybe approximately as high as you think your finished stitch will be. So I've got some extra space there. Now you're going to take your index finger on the hand that you're holding the hook with. You're going to tack the top of that working loop down so it doesn't move. So next you're going to yarn over using that loop. So you're going to go down in front and up behind. And this whole time you want to keep a really firm hold on the top of that working loop so it doesn't slip up like that. So one more time, raise your working loop height, hold it down at the top, and then yarn over using that working loop. So here, keep holding on and insert the hook into the first stitch. So here I'll go through both loops again and yarn over and pull up that loop through the stitch. So this whole time I am holding on to here. So it now is at the point where there are 3 loops on the hook, and that second one is sort of twice as thick because we've yarned over with a loop rather than just the individual working yarn. So from here, finish off the same way as you would a normal one. So again, keep a really firm hold on the top of that loop there, yarn over, pull through the first 2, and then here if that top one is kind of loose, you can maybe pull on the working yarn a little bit to tighten it up, and yarn over, pull through 2. So the finished standing double crochet stitch looks like this. And let me go ahead and make a few more regular double crochet stitches so we can compare. So let's do 1, 2, 3 more. Oop. 3. There we go. So now we have 4 total stitches in this row. So yep, definitely a lot more similar to this one, because again, the structure of how we created it is more similar. If you look at the top here, I find that a lot of the times before you're attaching, that stitch in the next row to the end, the very top of that standing stitch might look a little funky, but it is right there. So that is stitch 1, and then 2, 3, and 4. So from the side, it'll look like that. So I have gone ahead and finished up this row. So I have my 10 stitches with the first one being a standing double crochet stitch. And let's learn that alternate method for the standing double crochet. So this one, instead of pulling up that big loop and working around it, we're essentially going to stack 2 single crochet stitches on top of each other. So yeah, no turning chain, because that is the whole point of the standing stitch. So we're going to work that first double crochet stitch right into our first stitch in the row below here. So I'll go in, pull up a loop. So I have 2 loops, yarn over, pull through both. So that's our first single crochet stitch. And you should see there's the 2 loops that make that up. So there's this sort of top or outer one, and then there's the one below it that's actually grabbing on to the row below. So here I'm going to insert the hook into the middle of this loop here on the side, like that, to grab the loop, or like the arm that's on this end. And I'm going to attach my second single crochet stitch there. So again, I'm going into the middle of this part here, picking up just that side, and I'm going to attach a single crochet stitch there. So now you can see the finished standing stitch is made up of 4 loops that are connected there, and the top is kind of facing a little bit sideways, but we'll still be able to work into it when we come back the other way. So same as everything else, second stitch onwards, you can just work it regularly. So let's do a few and then see how that second method looks next to those. So here I have 4 stitches, so 1, 2, 3, and then this is the top of that first stitch right here. So we're counting this as a stitch, no turning chain. So that is standing stitch option number 2. So remember, when you're working back into that, you want to go all the way to the end, find the top like little V of that stitch, make sure you're picking up those loops there. So that was 4 different ways to make the very first stitch in your row of double crochet stitches. So this was the turning chain method, where the chain 3 counts as the first stitch. This was the turning chain method, where your chain 2 is not counted as your first stitch. And then these 2 here are 2 different ways of doing a standing double crochet stitch, so no turning chain on either. This is the one where we pulled up an extra big loop at the beginning and did our yarn over on the loop. This one right here is where we stacked 2 double crochet stitches on top of each other. And you can see for both of these, especially, once you've blocked it, the edges are a lot less bumpy. This one, I would say the actual stitch itself is straighter, but it makes kind of this little bottom loop stick out a little bit more. So as to which one to use, it kind of just comes down to making a little swatch in the yarn and hook that you want to use for a project, and deciding which one you like the best. So if you're doing a more solid stitch pattern, so not something that has a lot of open mesh or lace work, I would probably go with one of these three. And honestly, if you are going to be crocheting a border over the edge or seaming the edges together, there's nothing wrong, I think, with doing the sort of standard way with the 2 chains to turn right here. But if you are going to leave the edges open or it just really bugs you and you want straighter edges, definitely try out doing a standing stitch. And again, there's a whole bunch of variations on that, so you can go down the rabbit hole on YouTube and see how people do that. And back to our lonely swatch here with the chain 3. You might be asking at this point, why on earth would anybody choose to do this method at all? So in my opinion, I would say you probably don't want to do it again for solid stitches, but if you are following a crochet pattern that calls for a open stitch, so in this case I have a simple mesh stitch that's constructed by alternating double crochet stitches with chains. So double crochet chain all the way down. You can see here the method where you chain 3 and count that as your first stitch. I think looks a lot more reasonable. So here on this side, I have my swatch where I've done that chain 2 and then a regular or like a kind of true double crochet stitch to start. And it is a lot more noticeable here that we've got that extra bit of yarn hanging out on the side where we've made that turning chain versus here. Again, especially if it's been blocked, these swatches I have not washed and dried and like pinned them out to get those nice crispy edges. But yeah, and also it's honestly just, it's a lot faster if you're going to be seaming it again anyway. Just doing that chain 3, if your pattern is otherwise kind of more open, can just be a lot easier on your hands. You can, of course, also still do that standing stitch method, even with a more open pattern. So here on this swatch, I've done my very first stitch in the row using that pull up the loop extra big and yarn over with the loop standing stitch method. So I think that looks pretty nice as well. If you are kind of substituting these to what a pattern you're following says, you do want to note that using a standing stitch may affect your row height. So you can see here, this was my chain 3 start, and it is a little bit taller kind of than the standing stitch 1. So again, I think they both look fine, but if you're trying to be super exact with, you know, what your row height is to get a particular size of finished object, you do want to pay attention to that. But yeah, so that is one reason why we have our chain 3 start. And here is one more example comparing the chain 3 start versus the standing stitch start. So here I have 2 classic granny squares. I've worked them in continuous rounds and I did not like flip my row after each round. So we're kind of having all the stitches face the same way. Here you can see that the one with the chain 3 start, these clusters are slightly thinner than the other ones versus here, if anything, they're slightly thicker. I think for granny square type things, both look fine. Again, depending on the yarn, so like how thick it is, how fuzzy it is, just try out both if you're not sure which one to use for your pattern and just go with whichever looks nicer. Here is one more example. This one, I just have one, but this is with a much finer or thinner yarn. So I did these swatches with a 4mm hook and what I would describe as a DK weight or a weight 3 yarn. This one was a 2.5mm hook on a fingering weight or a weight 1 yarn. So here I did flip the piece over every time I started a new row. So instead of always going in the same direction, I switched the direction I was working for each round. And here Between the smaller scale and that like flipping of everything, I feel like you can't really tell on like, a finished object, if I was say turning this into a top and wearing it, that I did that chain 3 start rather than a standing stitch. And again, especially if you're working at a smaller scale, it's going to be a lot easier to do that chain 3. So, don't knock it. For an even smaller example, here is sort of one of your traditional doilies. So this is with a lace weight yarn. I want to say it was a 1mm hook that I used to make this. And here I just did the chain 3 start on the edges. Again, this hasn't been blocked super recently. If you're super duper traditional, you would block and starch this so it's nice and crispy with the straight edges. But when you're working at that like really tiny scale, I do think it does tend to suit that chain 3 start a little bit better. Also, when you're looking at it at a kind of comfortable distance at this point, it's not going to show up nearly as much as when you are looking at something that is this sort of a thickness. So I would say it probably matters more to experiment with which starting method to use if you're using a chunkier yarn. And not that that means you always need to do a standing stitch for a thicker yarn. So here, it's a very fuzzy yarn, and I've used a 7mm hook to make this. So this was a couple of strands held together. So I had that medium or worsted weight. This is an alpaca wool blend yarn held with 2 lace weight strands with kind of fuzzy alpaca yarn in there. So that makes a nice lofty soft fabric. And again, here I was turning the direction I was working with each row. So that also de-emphasizes where that kind of different stitch is, because it's not always here. It's like alternating which side it's on. But here I have used a chain 3, so you can see it a little bit more there. But I think because the yarn is so like fuzzy and it kind of blends together a little bit more, it's, not really too noticeable there. So this is another project where if I was going to make a larger item with this yarn out of granny squares, I'd probably just stick with that chain 3 start instead of bothering with the standing stitches. So yeah, just a little show and tell there to show you maybe why there's all those different methods. All right, so we are now at the end of the video. If you made it all the way through, thank you so much for sticking with me. I know that was a lot. If you found that video helpful or entertaining, go ahead and give it a like, and I'll see you in the next one.